In Bucharest, Romania, in a residential neighborhood, this building is a secret the Romanian government has tried to protect. For years, the CIA used this building as a makeshift prison for its most valuable detainees. It is codenamed Bright Light, and it is here that 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was held, along with others, before heading to Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. So say former U.S. intelligence officials identifying pictures of the prison.
The cells were prefabricated. They weren't small. I think they were bigger than maybe, your average jail cell here in the United States. They had a clock in the cell, and they had an arrow pointing to Mecca. So the prisoners would know when it was time to pray.
The existence of a CIA prison in Romania has long been known, but its location never made public until now, after a joint investigation by the Associated Press and German public television ARD Panorama. The Romanian prison was part of a network of so-called black sites the CIA operated around the world, all of them closed by 2006, the interrogation and detention program ending in 2009. The basement here in Bucharest is one of the most secure rooms in all of Romania, officials say. But Americans running a prison here?
Oh, the Romanian government denies it, that a prison ever existed there and that prisoners were ever existed there. I mean, not only did people identify the prison to us, I mean, there's also, I've talked to half a dozen sources who've all confirmed that they operated a prison there and these were detainees there.
Former U.S. officials say because the building belonged to the government, it provided good cover. The prison did not need heavy security because residents knew it was a federal building. In the neighborhood nearby, shopkeepers are not so sure what happened here.
I don't believe this, because we have friends that live near the place and they would have told us about cars or something else.
I haven't heard of such things. It's the first time I hear about this, and of course I'm surprised.
In post-communist Romania, people are not inclined to snoop, where security forces are feared, in a country with a history of spying on its own citizens. Lee Powell, The Associated Press.
Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me today. I thought I was going to do that data center show today, but wow, I got kind of sidetracked with Romania. I was going to do an opening comment to clear up a couple of things about Romania. That timeline, it seemed awfully suspicious about when certain things happened and didn't happen. So, and then I was also talking about the one plan for children in the bedrooms would be children in actual bedrooms with mom or dad under the same roof, and children could be set up in what looks like bedrooms, for cheap production, all that. Well, yeah, turns out I watched every World War II documentary that ever came out. I used to think that documentaries were all true, right? So somehow I was thinking back in my mind about those documentaries, and I thought, yeah, those wars left a lot of old buildings behind. So maybe I should look around Romania to see what old buildings were left behind that could possibly be converted into studios for children to film themselves doing pornographic acts. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. And then I ran across some things like, a Black-Ops operation that went on during in Romania. So, and then also these little pesky issues with the laws. So yeah, so one last clip I was listening to as far as this Romania business and Erica Kirk and her family being over in some orphanage in Romania that I talked about in the last show. You'll have to You'll have to allow me to apologize. Recapping last shows is not going to be on my agenda for today, so we'll all have to kind of listen to the last show. So anyway, I last spoke about Erica Kirk's family, the wife of Charlie Kirk, the recently supposedly dead guy. Anyway, so they had a charity in Romania, and then I found one more piece of information. There was a NATO officer named Otto Bushner, and there was some claim about this in some Romanian newspapers, okay? And the guy did actually, in the clip, did actually bring up the newspapers, so I believe that he was on the right trail. So anyway, He talked about the Romanian nonprofit that they're running there, the Romanian Angels that I talked about, where they had officers delivering presents to Romanian children. So yeah, so evidently this guy, Otto Bushner, was a NATO guy, a NATO officer, and he was an officer. He was accused of crimes at a U.S. base. So yeah, so did Otto Bushner do crimes at U.S. bases? Well, actually, that leads to another interesting question. So then I was looking at the buildings in Romania, and I found Black-Ops sites. Like sites that they were running Black-Ops in. So a lot of things started emerging out of these buildings, and then of course I realized another big thing is that chefs, the people who cook, they also wear white coats, and we've had a couple interesting deaths of White House chefs. So yeah, White House chefs really play into this whole deal. So anyway, that's what I'll be going over today. But anyway, so first, how does somebody like this Otto guy, how does he get away with a supposed crime committed in Romania and get off the hook? Well, because there was a Romanian Defense Cooperation Agreement. The agreement, signed in 2005, sets the terms for U.S. forces stationed in Romania. Under these, they're called Statute of Forces, and keep that word in mind, that'll come up a lot today. So under these statutes of forces, or also they call them SOFAs, S-O-F-As, crimes committed by U.S. military personnel while on duty or on base typically fall under U.S. jurisdiction, not the host country. So that means that Romania would generally not prosecute. The U.S. military justice system, like the court-martials under the Uniform Code of Military, would handle it. So, yeah. So they say this arrangement led allegations to be swept under the rug, and the officers did get to retire in Romania without charges. So I dug a little bit into, the laws that NATO was running. Good morning, NATO. This is actually standard in most NATO host nation agreements. U.S. personnel abroad are usually subject to U.S. military law rather than local law for acts committed in the line of duty or on base. If misconduct happens off duty, off base, the host country often has primary jurisdiction. But in practice, cases can get negotiated between governments. Because one controversial method also that I found is the U.S. government. This is I was digging. You got to start reading all this paperwork. You just can't start taking people's word for things on social media, because they spew out one thing, but it really means 100 other things. Okay, so in digging through all of this paperwork, I found this one thing called free from inspection, which obviously caught my attention. Because all you have to do is go over and read these papers, right? SOFA, it's right there. You can read it all. But most people just stop it and don't bother to read it. So one controversial provision mentioned in summaries is that U.S. government aircraft vehicles are free from inspection. See, I've been talking about that, but I wanted to give you actual proof. So yes, nobody has to inspect those things. Also, civil aircraft operating exclusively under contract to the U.S. Department of Defense enjoys similar freedom. So all those NATO planes, all of those U.S. military planes, and any planes contracted out to the Department of Defense or the DOD, the people with all the child porn on their computers, yeah, those people. So they can contract planes, and those planes then fall under this exclusive arrangement. Pretty handy, right? Because let me see, because then I went looking for, well, how did this stuff get started, right? In 1951, the year I was born, not that long ago, NATO members signed the NATO Status of Forces Agreement, or SOFA. That treaty set the baseline rules for how forces from one NATO country are treated when stationed in another NATO country. And it lays out like this: criminal jurisdiction, tax customs exemptions, and civil claims. So yeah, so I don't want to bog down in too much of this SOFA business, but yeah, if you're looking for how is this continuing on, likely under SOFA, right? So then they have to get these countries to sign on to these SOFA deals, right? So in Romania, in 2005, there was a Defense Cooperation Agreement, or DCA, which supplements the NATO SOFA. Got that straight? Yeah, okay, I'm going to keep going here. These implemented agreements cover things like which bases the U.S. can use, logistics, construction, environmental rules, and sometimes more detailed arrangements about jurisdiction. So NATO provides the template, the U.S. and Romania negotiate the specifics, is how it all works, okay? So that's how they work together, because I was getting quite confused about why is NATO writing these SOFA deals, and why is the U.S. military like seem to be underneath the power of NATO, right? So anyway, so then I started questioning that, and it's because all NATO members agreed to the same baseline SOFA. The text is nearly identical across the alliance. Cut and paste, right? So when the U.S. negotiates with Romania or Germany, Italy, Poland, etc., they're really just customizing that NATO-wide template. So it's not NATO headquarters in Brussels writing Romania's agreement. It's the U.S. and Romania. But they're plugging into rules already agreed to by NATO. So NATO agreed to all this stuff under the SOFA deal. So what happens is, first they have SOFA, the NATO SOFA in 1951, a common treaty all NATO allies signed, setting the default rules. This is why the wording looks the same whether you're looking at Germany, Italy, Romania, or elsewhere. Yeah, because in reading all that material, I wasn't getting clarified. I was getting confused. So anyway, so then what happens is this: there's supplemental bilateral deals to go along with this SOFA deal. So each host country then negotiates its own agreements with the U.S. or whichever ally is stationing troops. That's where you see things like which bases are shared, what construction is allowed, who pays utilities, how customs works, etc. These agreements can also tighten or loosen how jurisdiction works in practice. So NATO didn't sit down in Brussels and draft Romania's 2005 agreement. That was negotiated between Washington and Bucharest. But both sides were working within the NATO SOFA framework they'd already signed decades earlier. So that's how it works. So, yeah, so on duty, it's supposed to go to U.S. courts if something happens in another country. Off duty, it's supposed to go to local jurisdiction, but it typically gets overridden and it goes under U.S. jurisdiction. So, because U.S. military courts usually keep jurisdiction, there's a perception, kind of a bad one, and sometimes reality, that U.S. personnel are treated more leniently than if they went through local courts. If the U.S. decides not to prosecute or gives what looks like a light punishment, the host population can feel justice was denied. Well, and if you look at any of these cases I've been talking about, nobody really gets any kind of claims against them. So, because there have been a couple of cases like in Japan and Okinawa, there have been high-profile cases of U.S. troops committing violent crimes off-duty. Even though Japan had jurisdiction for off-duty crimes, in practice, the U.S. often requests a waiver, and local anger has sometimes sparked huge protests. Yeah, I bet it has. And then there was an incident in Italy. There was a cable car disaster in 1998. A U.S. Marine jet hit a ski gondola cable, killing 20 people. Italy technically had jurisdiction, but the U.S. insisted it was on duty, so the case went to a U.S. military court. The pilots were acquitted of manslaughter, which caused massive outrage in Italy. Then another example in South Korea. Similar frustrations have led to protests whenever a U.S. soldier escapes local trial and is instead dealt with, often lightly, by U.S. authorities. So local governments can refuse to waive jurisdiction and insist on prosecuting, but it is rare, but it has happened. Sometimes victims can receive financial compensation. Well, let's not drift too far into fairy tale land. Very few people actually ever get compensation. So yes, it actually, this is just my view, it actually can put whole populations at risk, right? You got all these military people on these bases. You know, as much as I love NATO and the U.S. military, having all those people floating around, let's just talk about Romania, and knowing that they can be free to do whatever they want, and if they're caught, they're just going to get lightly treated. Yeah, that could be a real risk on the local population, right? Because they're the ones in charge. That is why at all of these rituals and stuff, these children are always shown policemen. Either they're real policemen in uniforms or they're fake policemen, I don't know. But how they shut up children is all they have to do is have one person in an official uniform tell that kid, we're all in on it, you better shut up, kid. And that kid gets the message. Full stop, right then and there. So yeah, having this extra authority works in many, many ways. So because the local population then sees that, oh, where are you going to go, right? So anyways, and so complaints usually come in the form of protests. Well, that's all good and dandy, but right. So anyhow, so as far as Romania, it all got started with the NATO SOFA in 1951, and the general rules were set up. And then in 2005, the U.S. and Romania signed their DCA and specific rules for U.S. troops in Romania, building on that NATO SOFA. So that's how the jurisdiction happened. So let's take a look. So I started looking at, there's a few cases, but I'm not going to go into every case. We get the idea. That's the laws, right? And then in looking at all this stuff and looking at crimes, I ran across these black sites prisons. Yeah, no kidding, right? So yeah, I was just looking at, because first, to settle this whole issue, before I could explain how they're possibly using these buildings, I wanted to lay out, well, who's in charge of all the criminals in Romania, right? Well, I mean, I think the criminals are actually running the whole network, if you ask me. But keep in mind, this is just my opinion. And at this point, I'm a highly suspicious person. So I think what's happened, you have this overpowering of the U.S. and NATO, all those people in those uniforms and stuff, right? And then you got the local population. They seem to be deferring to the generals and stuff, right? So the local cops and stuff, they're working closely with the NATO people and stuff. So I don't think you have to be, let's say, the sharpest cookie in the jar if you were living in Romania to figure out that, well, I think the police and the NATO people might be dangerous for me, right? So anyways, so then I'm looking at, all I was doing was looking at security, because I thought we need to understand who's really in charge, because my whole body of my work is to get to the root of how these psychopaths took charge and the crimes they have committed against society. So obviously, part of this crime has to do with them going in and setting up all the rules, right? So they wear the badges, they write the rules, so that's pretty well settled. Okay, so then I thought, well, I'll just do a search for other crimes, and I thought I was looking for other crimes having to do with U.S. military bases. Well, sort of is, because I ran into, during that time period, after 9/11, the CIA ran a network of secret black sites prisons in Eastern Europe and elsewhere as parts of an extraordinary rendition and detention program. Romania was one of the countries implicated, hosting a clandestine CIA detention facility in Bucharest, sometimes called Bright Light, and that was active around 2003 to 2004. And that became exposed because it was called the Al-Nashiri case in 2018. This Al-Nashiri, a Saudi national, was suspected of planning the USS Cole bombing. He was captured in 2002 and moved through several CIA black sites. Evidence like flight logs, testimony, investigation showed that he was detained and tortured in Romania between 2004 and 2005. And he brought a case against Romania at the European Court of Human Rights. Boy, what a brave person, right? So that was what exposed these black site prisons in Romania. Yeah, I don't know. At that point, I'm thinking, wow, I thought I was just kind of looking at some laws and some general crime. So the European Court of Human Rights, or the ECHR, ruled that Romania was complicit in hosting a CIA secret prison in Bucharest, allowing the CIA to detain and torture suspects there, failed to properly investigate or hold anyone accountable, violating multiple rights under the European Convention on Human Rights, including the ban on torture and the right to liberty. So Romania was ordered to pay damages to this gentleman and to conduct a genuine investigation. So I would say this is the biggest hidden in plain sight scandals of the post 9/11 years, and that was the CIA Black Site program. A lot of horror came out of that 9/11 stuff, those Patriot Acts, and I am now in my home being punished because of that, because out of 9/11 grew this need to root out the terrorists in our country. Yeah, and that's how they set up all those fusion centers. I've done shows about that, so not going there now. But after 9/11, a lot of horrors took place. But the real horrors, I don't ever like to compare one horror is worse than the other horror. That is a bad plan. But anyway, so post 9/11, another big horror was the CIA Black Site program, and it was global. But Eastern Europe played a particularly important role because NATO expansion and new U.S. defense agreements created both the facilities and the political cover. See how it all works? It's really handy they have all those attorneys to back up their fancy suits, right? So how did this CIA Black Site network start? And this is all thanks to the people on the blog world who have done all the FOIA work and dug through all these things. You'll never hear of these people over on social media because that is not where they hang out. They hang out on the blog world. So this work stands on the shoulders of those fine people. So it started in 2002 under President Bush. It was managed by the CIA's Counterterrorism Center. And 2002 was interesting because 2002 was right after 1994, right, obviously, and that was when computers became widely available in homes. So, and the purpose of this original Black Site network was to secretly detain and interrogate high-value terrorist suspects outside U.S. legal oversight. So this whole Black Site thing really started earlier than most of us probably thought that it did, right? So the purpose was secretly detain and so suspects were captured in Afghanistan, Pakistan, the Middle East, and Africa, then rendered or flown covertly to hidden prisons worldwide. In Romania, we're going to talk about that one. The code name for the Black Site network was Bright Light. It was located at a building in Bucharest, widely reported to be in the basement of a government building, though exact site is classified. Active period, around 2003 to 2005. Detainees, several high-value suspects, including Al-Rahim, the person he was a USS Cole bombing suspect, and possibly that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed they blamed as being the 9/11 planner, though records are of course contested. So this was the operation. Prisoners were subjected to torture methods, including waterboarding, mock executions, sleep deprivation, and confinement in small boxes. It was exposed by the Council of Europe investigation. this report in 2007 and later confirmed in these rulings from the ECHR in 2018. And in Poland, there was one called Quartz. It was a secret site near northeast Poland. Active 2002 to 2003, one of the first black sites. Funny how this stuff gets started first in Eastern Europe, right? Poland was also found guilty by the ECHR in 2014 for hosting the site in order to pay compensation. In Lithuania, that was codenamed Violet, reportedly in a converted writing academy. 2005 to 2006, somewhat later in the program, at least 2 known possible more detainees. Lithuania, like Romania, was condemned by the ECHR in 2018. At least 3 confirmed sites in Eastern Europe, Poland, Romania, Lithuania. Each was used to hold only a handful of high-value detainees at a time, not large camps. Estimated dozens of prisoners passed through in total, often moved between sites to keep them disoriented. Yeah, load up those planes, right? And you got protection on any plane you put them on, right? According to you and your lawyers, right? So these sites were part of a global web. Others were in Afghanistan, Thailand, and possibly Morocco. These programs bypassed local laws and were hidden from most parliamentary or publics. They became symbols of how U.S. leveraged NATO allies' dependence on Washington to secure cooperation in the War of Terror. The ECHR rulings against Poland, Romania, and Lithuania were landmark, confirming secret prisons did exist, finding European governments complicit in torture and awarding damages to victims. So in Romania specifically, we're talking about a single but very high-value site in Bucharest, not a widespread system. But in the region, Eastern Europe became central because of political willingness and U.S. military presence after NATO enlargement. See, everything always has a cause, right? They always set up these plans in advance. Of course they have to go and enlarge NATO before they can start doing all these extra tricks, right? So, after September 11th, 2001 attacks, the U.S. launched the extraordinary rendition and detention programs managed by the CIA. The aim was to secretly detain and interrogate suspected terrorists outside U.S. territory, avoiding oversight by U.S. court or Congress. Detainees were moved across a hidden network of black sites around the world where enhanced interrogation techniques, widely recognized as torture, were used. So yeah, pretty big deal, right? So yeah, it's good they got those few, well, I mean, the only reason it's good they got these few cases settled, it makes it harder for the naysayers to say, well, that's not true, you're making it up, the U.S. government doesn't go around the world torturing people, now come on. Tell the truth here. The U.S. government is honorable. You're just making up lies. No, we're not making up lies, right? This is, in fact, the truth. So Eastern Europe, at least 3 confirmed sites. Romania, Bright Light. Poland, Quartz. And Lithuania, Violet. Each site held only a small number of high-value detainees at a time. Yeah, they were transported around. So, yeah. For years, local governments denied the sites existed. Investigations by the Council of Europe, journalists, and later the ECHR forced acknowledgement. So, landmark judgments against Poland 2014, Romania 2018, and Lithuania 2018 confirmed secret prisons did exist, established state complicity, and required compensation. So, Despite rulings, no single U.S. officers have ever been prosecuted, and local officials in host countries largely avoided punishment. These cases demonstrated how cooperation agreements between NATO, their SOFA deal, bilateral defense deals, could be used to shield U.S. operations from local oversight, feeding suspicion and resentment among local populations. And also remember this, that it feeds compliance, right? Because what are you going to do, right? What exactly are you going to do? You're a family in Romania raising your kids. You got to have your eyes open all the time. So what are you going to do? You can't exactly run around and start reporting these people because they are the people, right? So Romania had a pretty significant role in the CIA Black Site program. So yeah, Eastern Europe became central to U.S. counterterrorism operations, largely out of public view. So so it's all been confirmed, and I have all the information. They launched the first one in Thailand. It was called the Cat's Eye in 2002. That was the first confirmed site. In Poland was the next one, opened late 2002. That was where they had the Khalid Sheikh Mohammed person. 2003, their expansions. Poland was still active with multiple. Afghanistan, their group is called Salt Pit. It was a large secret prison near Kabul, used extensively through the program. And one other thing is, I don't think is here, is that Abu Ghraib prison scandal. But anyway, and Morocco was used as a transfer point. Transfer point, you read that? That whole area is a transfer point. So anyway, the evidence seems pretty clear to me, right? That they've been involved in a lot of different things, and I have all of the information you'd ever want to know about them located right at your fingertips, either down below or over at my website. So they finally got caught, and then they had to close them down. And so how did they get caught? Well, the CIA Black Site fallout started in 2005. Washington Post breaks story on secret CIA prisons in Eastern Europe. Poland and Romania are suspected. First official hints at the extraordinary rendition network. 2006, U.S. President George W. Bush publicly acknowledges existence of CIA black sites, but not locations. 2007, Council of Europe, there was the Marty report, confirms secret detention took place in Poland, Romania, and Lithuania. Widespread European political denials continued. 2009, Lithuanian parliamentary inquiry confirms a site was prepared for CIA use, later called Violet. 2012, ECHR case filings began when those people like the Al Nashir person started suing. Good for them. 2014, U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee report, partially declassified of course, details torture, lists sites by code name, Quartz, Bright Light, Violet, etc. So that was 2014. There was the ECHR ruling in Poland. Poland found complicit, ordered to pay damages. 2015, further litigation builds against Romania and Lithuania at the ECHR. 2018, ECHR rulings against Romania. Romania found complicit. ECHR ruling also in Lithuania in 2018. Lithuania found complicit. 2020, Poland, Romania, Lithuania have all paid compensation under ECHR orders. No U.S. officials prosecuted. CIA maintains classification on full program details. Gee, amazing, right? Kind of really a pretty good trick, right? When you could do all the crimes and then control all the information, and then you have the badges to go out and arrest other people. didn't really do it. So they say periodical media reports keep the issues alive, but political momentum in Europe has faded. So here's the pattern: 2005 to 2007, the first exposure and denials. 2009 to 2014, investigations gather evidence. 2014 to 2018, ECHR rulings hit one by one. After 2018, cases settled by governments, embarrassed, but no deep structural accountability. So yeah, and I have and they know a lot more now, these wonderful blog people, because they know how they set up and hide these black sites, because that had me kind of confused. Because remember, I'm also looking at this from a couple different perspectives. I'm wondering how they set up these black sites, because I'm also wondering how did they set up these buildings with children to be running this pornography operation out of, right? So I have a dual reason when I'm asking these questions, just to be clear, right? So how they set up and hid black sites, step by step. Choose a cooperating host. Target countries where one's willing to cooperate quietly, or where political control made secrecy easier. Eastern Europe was attractive after NATO enlargement. Well, I argue NATO enlarged because, see what I'm saying? So anyway, so next step, find a discrete facility, often a small government building, an unused military compound, or a converted private site like that writing academy. These sites were small, only a handful of cells to limit exposure. And then you set up legal and diplomatic cover, bilateral access, defense agreements. You used diplomatic status for personnel and aircraft, and local security arrangements create a legal and operational cushion for yourself. And then you have to create plausible deniability and secrecy compartments. You have to only let a tiny number of people in each host government and CIA know the full details. Work was need to know. You need to also have cover stories. Sites and flights were described as logistics, training, or diplomatic movements. And probably exactly how they're moving all these kids out of the country also, right? Because here's the point I'm going to be getting to here in a bit, is that they claim Romania is the biggest country in the world for sending these poor children out to perform sex acts and whatnot, right? Well, they're not catching many of them at the border, because I don't think many of them are cruising across the border in cars. I think they're cruising out of that country in airplanes. So, yeah, diplomatic movements, yeah, they got all that covered, right? So load up those planes. So use of contractors and intermediaries to obscure direct government to government involvement. Yeah, of course, that's why they covered all those planes, right? The planes have the same rights as the other people have. So when they hire a commercial plane, that plane becomes like a military plane, right? As far as certifiability, zero, right? So so they say that detainees were seized in the field or transferred to other detention points. They arranged secret flights, aircraft with misleading flight plans, or diplomatic plates. Often Gulfstream jets were used. Flight logs were falsified or obscured. Short stays or transfers. Detainees were commonly moved around between sites to confuse tracking and witnesses. And here's the other thing, they set up these buildings just like I've envisioned these kids being set up. They set them up into small cells instead of small bedrooms, right? But in this case, they were small cells with sensory isolation, solitary confinement, darkness, small boxes, and sensory deprivation were common. Yeah, these kids would be getting, they'd be in small bedroom-like studios. Rarely poor lighting. They probably didn't put them near windows and stuff, because the windows could be dangerous, right? So probably in inner buildings. These kids would be in small little studios and stuff, poor lighting, some sort of a form of, since going without the sun is bad for us. So, and then of course they provided intense security, guards, surveillance, and isolation from the outside prevented discovery. Only a few interrogators, medics, and guards rotated through to reduce the risk of leaks. The enhanced interrogation techniques, waterboarding, stress positions, sleep deprivation, temperature extremes, as later documented, were used on some detainees. And of course there was medical personnel, you know, those doctors with those white coats. They monitored interrogation fitness, which gives a veneer of medical oversight while enabling continued abuse. Interrogation and medical notes were tightly controlled. In many cases, records were destroyed or classified. Secret funding lines, payment to local partners, contractors, and renovations were routed through opaque contracting vehicles. The CIA paid to retrofit sites, make the cells, the holding areas, often under innocuous contract descriptions. They signed non-disclosure agreements, and that's me coming up a lot here in a bit with these data centers. Non-disclosure agreements with local staff and contractors, intimidation and secrecy reinforced compliance. There was public denials by local governments when investigators later surfaced. Many officials claimed ignorance. The movement of the prisoners before independent investigations could access them. Closed on purpose a site quickly if exposure rose risk. Move prisoners to another country or to Guantanamo. Destroy or classify documents to hinder later accountability. Political pressure and secrecy classifications in the U.S. limited domestic investigations or prosecution. So, in this case, which I think also parallels these children's case that I'll be getting to in a bit, because the social reforms in Romania are calling for the children not to be in big buildings. They're calling for them to be in more smaller settings. So you'll see in a bit why I'm angling in this direction here, okay? So, because they obviously had experience setting up these buildings with little compartments in them, right? So it was small scale, it was compartmentalized, meant fewer leaks and fewer witnesses. It had the diplomatic contractual cover, made routine oversight by local authorities difficult. It had the it was financially opaque, and contractors, they obscured direct lines of responsibility. Classification and political resistance in the U.S. prevented prosecutions and made full accountability unlikely. So yeah, they had the first, they started hearing about these sites in 2014, and in 2018 they had those cases. So yes, so if anybody says they weren't true, of course they were true, and they got triggered right after 9/11 to covertly move people all over the place. So anyhow, so let me scroll down here. What's next on the list here, you ask? Well, got some interesting stuff. So yeah, so actually the Abu Ghraib scandal was the trigger for the shutdown of CIA black sites. In 2004 to 5, there were leaks and press reports, and then there was the Abu Ghraib scandal. Although not a CIA program, images of abuse by U.S. military in Iraq made torture a political flashpoint. And then in 2005, the Washington Post broke the story of CIA black sites in Eastern Europe. This was the first mainstream acknowledgement, causing international outrage. Well, let's get outraged again because it's still going on, right? So anyway, so there was all kinds of legal pressure and all that kind of stuff. And I have all of it down below if you want to look further. And I've been using this "too hot in the kitchen" phrase, right? Because that's what it always appears. There's always some tipping point, right? 2005 to 2006 was the tipping point I found. Press exposure, court rulings, and EU investigations. Host countries were embarrassed and called out. The CIA and host governments calculated that the political diplomatic risk was greater than the intelligence value. Instead of fixing the program, they shut down or transferred detainees before it exploded further. The CIA, the black sites, were not ended because CIA lost interest. They were ended because secrecy collapsed under leaks, lawsuits, European investigations, and political exposure. It was exactly the "too hot in the kitchen" thing that I keep describing about all of these things, right? So, and I have all the timelines down below. It started, launched in 2001 to 2002 after 9/11. Expansion phase, 2002 to 2005. They were facing exposure after Abu Ghraib prison leaks in 2004 to 2006. So they officially shut down in 2009. Obama got into office, and I'll have a lot more about Obama. Obama signed Executive Order 13491, banning CIA secret prisons and requiring interrogations to comply with the Army Field Manual. So Obama shut down the whole operation right after he became the president. Gee, there's a lot of things that connect to this that I just can't resist telling you about. So let me take a look here. So while he ended the program, Obama resisted full prosecution of CIA officials, saying he wanted to look forward, not backward. This frustrated many human rights advocates. Yes, when he made that statement, I saw red. Obama was pounding that podium, "I'm here for peace, end these wars," when really Obama was there to bring more wars, okay? Because Bush created, expanded, and operated the Black Site program. Obama formally shut it down, but avoided punishing those involved. So Barack Obama, he was inaugurated on January the 20th, 2009. On January the 22nd, 2009, just 2 days later, he signed Executive Order 13491, which banned the CIA from operating secret prisons, required all interrogations to follow the Army Field Manual, ending enhanced interrogation, ordered the closure of any remaining CIA black sites. So Obama was in office only 48 hours when he formally ended the program. By 2009, the U.S. Supreme Court had already ruled the Bush-era detention practices. These rulings recognized detainee rights under the Geneva Conference and the U.S. Constitution. So what this meant was the U.S. detention system was already on shaky legal ground. Obama's legal advisors knew that if it was left in place, it would collapse in court. So Obama comes along and shuts it down. That's why they brought in that black guy, right? So the international diplomacy and U.S. image were at stake. Allies in Europe, Poland, Romania, and Lithuania were under huge pressure from their own public and courts after leaks revealed cooperation with CIA torture. The EU was investigating and local governments were being embarrassed. Obama campaigned on restoring America's moral standing. Closing black sites immediately was a symbolic reset for global diplomacy. So by 2008, the phrase CIA Black Sites were no longer secret. It was headline news. We had the 2005 Washington Post expose. The Council of Europe reports made the program a PR disaster. Obama didn't want the early months of his presidency bogged down by endless stories about torture and hidden prisons. Obama had explicitly campaigned on ending torture and closing black sites. Acting immediately fulfilled a high-profile promise and distinguished him from Bush. It also sent a message to his progressive base that he would deliver a change right away. So where is the too hot in the kitchen factor? Well, by late Bush years, the CIA itself was winding down black site use. The cost outweighed the intelligence benefit. Obama simply put the official lid on a program already in retreat. Doing it on day 2 avoided messy, drawn-out fights and made closure fait accompli before opposition could mobilize. So Obama shut down CIA black sites immediately because they were legally indefensible, diplomatically toxic, politically unpopular, and already collapsing under exposure, and, like I would call it, too hot in the kitchen. By moving on day 2, he seized control of the narrative. The U.S. was turning the page on torture, and Obama was the one delivering the break. So, of course, there were no prosecutions of CIA officials despite clear evidence of torture. Obama's DOJ declined to prosecute CIA officers or Bush administration lawyers who authorized it. I think also during that time, one of the main CIA people was a Walker's name, the last name Walker, and that person traces to the Bushes. I think one of Laura Bush's relatives on her side of the royal chain, of the gypsy chain, is a Walker, and that Walker was the one who was involved in the CIA when all this torture was taking place in the first place. They love all this torture stuff. They're always around when it's involved, right? So yeah, just despite clear evidence, they did not do anything. So Obama released some Bush-era memos, like the DOJ torture memos, to show how abuse was legally justified, but he blocked release of photos and key documents, arguing they might endanger U.S. personnel abroad, or how about U.S. executives abroad. He resisted publishing thousands of photos of detainee abuse in Iraq and Afghanistan. So Obama's DOJ used the state secrets privilege to shut down cases. That meant victims never got their day in court. Of course, he also said he was going to shut down Guantanamo, but that really never happened, right? He ordered Guantanamo closed, but yeah, that's still a black site in operation. So yeah, pretty clear that they're all on board with this deal, right? It's another typical case that a lot of us get tortured, and a lot of them seem to get off the hook. So. And then, of course, Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize in 2009, less than a year into his presidency. And he was cited for his extraordinary efforts to strengthen international diplomacy and cooperation between peoples. The Nobel Committee clearly gave it more as a Hope Award for his rhetoric and early moves, like closing black sites, engaging with allies, talking nuclear disarmament, not for actual achievements. But under Obama, a lot of interesting things happened. The drone wars. Obama massively expanded the CIA's drone strike program in Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia. So I guess this was a way of saying to the CIA, well, boys, I talked to your boss at the CIA. We sat down and we had a drink together, and we decided that, a little too hot in the kitchen for those little detention centers, those ones over in Romania where we're waterboarding people and stuff. So we come up with a new plan here. And this new plan, we're going to give you even bigger budget, CIA, because we love you, CIA. You've always been one of us. So CIA, we're going to start this drone strike program. Lots of people are going to get killed. The death count will be huge. Your budget will increase tenfold. Yeah, that's exactly how it happened. They switched from one horror show to the next, right? Now they're attacking people by drones. They're no longer picking them off the streets and hauling them off to buildings for torture, right? So, under Obama, U.S. drone strikes and special operation raids escalated sharply. And I see a pretty direct connection here, but hey, you'll have to decide for yourself. The Obama administration supported Saudi-led interventions in Yemen starting in 2015, providing arms, logistics, and intelligence, fueling a catastrophic war and humanitarian crisis. And then, of course, Obama went right into Libya in 2011. Obama launched a NATO-led intervention against Gaddafi, framed it as a humanitarian mission. Gaddafi was toppled, but Libya collapsed into chaos and civil war. Obama later admitted, "It was my worst mistake I ever made." We have Syria. Obama initially avoided large-scale U.S. military entry, but supported rebel groups and authorized airstrikes against ISIS. The U.S., and I have more about ISIS in a second here, the U.S. became deeply entangled in Syria's civil war without ever really resolving it. So, and then of course Obama, Afghanistan, 2009 and 2011, rather than ending the war quickly like he said, Obama approved a massive troop surge up to 100,000 U.S. troops. The war dragged on for another decade. Obama ended CIA Black Sites, and then he got the Nobel Peace Prize. But he expanded drone killings, launched the Libya War, escalated in Yemen, and prolonged Afghanistan. Many critics say his legacy was not less war, but war by different means. A lot of people in the U.S. and abroad have voiced frustration that Obama's image as a peace candidate and his rhetoric role as the first black president gave him a kind of political shield that limited open criticism, and that is exactly how it started. He started with the anti-Iraq war as the hope person, right? The symbol of the first black guy, right? The Nobel Peace Prize. So yeah, and he took one program that ended the torture sites, and he expanded covert war like on steroids, right? And it all started with his image on the campaign trail of hope and change. And even today, if you were to say, you know, I voted for Obama the first time around. I was wise to him, but I haven't voted for anybody after Obama, but because I realized everything was a trick, right? But if I said to anybody, if I said to anybody anything, gee, Diane, you sound like you're turning like into some kind of a racist here. Obama's our first black president. Can't you be proud of something? Do you always have to find fault? What's wrong with Obama? Nice guy. Just because he's black, is that why you're bringing this up? Yeah, it worked perfectly, and that was part of the plan. So anyway, so there's a whole thing. So the narrative began saying Obama ended torture and brought back diplomacy. Yeah. And Obama oversaw wars in at least 7 countries: Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, and Pakistan. So yeah, he leaves office with a mixed legacy. Most of the people in this country still think he is a great person. Something is really going wrong with most people's brains. But anyway, so looking at simple facts should not blow people's minds. We should, in fact, be able to discuss these things that we find, which are in fact something we should all be concerned about, right? And I'll cover a little bit more about Obama because I'm getting to his chef with white coat thing here in a second. ISIS, or probably the most infamous group that rose to power during Obama's presidency. But it wasn't the only one. Several terrorist groups either grew significantly or took advantage of U.S. policy choices in that era. So yeah, I don't know why I started veering off onto all this because all these terrorist groups, but I thought, well, we need to know about them all. I have files on them all, and they can become kind of confusing, but they refer back to Obama, our first black president, and because ISIS grew out of Al-Qaeda, and that, then ISIS was in when Obama was there. So anyway, I'm going to scroll down, but I have all these terrorist groups if you're ever interested, because you have the Boko Haram, you have the Taliban, and these terrorist groups used to kind of confuse me. I'm still a little confused about the Al-Shabaab in Somalia. There's a group now in Sudan which is creating a bloody horror show there, and I think the group in Sudan connects to Al-Qaeda, which would then connect back to the United States, right? So I listed all these terrorist groups, so should you ever find yourself interested in terrorist groups like I have been, it'll help them get you straight in the head about which groups are running which parts of the country. And also, then it provides you with evidence, right? Because directly under Obama, ISIS emerged from the remnants of Al-Qaeda in Iraq during his presidency, and became the world's most notorious terrorist group by 2014. So I'm going to scroll past his terrorist groups, but like I said, if you're ever interested, because while George Bush's wars created the conditions for jihadist movements or take root, it was during Barack Obama's presidency that terrorism decentralized and flourished. ISIS rose from the ashes of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. AQ-8P became Al-Qaeda's most lethal branch. Al-Shabaab expanded its regional reach. Boko Haram pledged allegiance to ISIS, and the Taliban resurged. I know there's a lot to these groups. In fact, more terrorist groups emerged, and existing ones were strengthened under Obama than under his predecessors. So the whole terrorist thing. Now, why am I talking terrorist thing? Well, no particular reason right now, because I was I was looking into Obama, and there was that death of his chef who wore a white coat, and then I spun off into all these terrorist groups because I'm trying to sort out which group is doing all the horror in Sudan. So I thought, well, while I'm at it, since I'm trying to help inform people about how these psychopaths are destroying the world, I thought, well, let's sort out all these terrorist groups, because they're literally behind it all, right? And they're the ones being created to also control the rest of us. So I'm not really sure why I spun this deep into it, but once I got going, because I was really trying to sort out, I still have the Al-Shabaab group sorted around. So I thought at that point, well, let's stop with the terrorists right now, because you need to get back to this other stuff. So it's all there if you want to take a look at it. So anyway, so how did Obama get so rich after his presidency? Well, in 2017, him and Michael signed a joint publishing deal worth about $65 million with Penguin Random House. His memoir, A Promised Land, and Her became global bestsellers, with Michelle's book alone selling over 10 million copies. In 2018, they launched the Higher Ground Productions. You never know, these were the same people who started all these terrorist groups with you, and signed a multi-year Netflix deal. I guess the moral of the story is this: if you're a black dude, you run for presidency, you get the Nobel Peace Prize, you get to start a bunch of terrorist groups, you get to drone everybody in the world, and when you get through all of that stuff, you get to go through a financial crisis, you get to rob a lot of people of their home and property back in 2008, and then you get to go around and make millions and millions of dollars and live on an estate where your own chef, wearing a white coat, mysteriously ends up dead, right? So so I'm getting back to where I started before I started circling all the terrorist people. But anyway, so somebody should really copy down all that terrorist stuff and start publishing it everywhere, because I am so tired of people misquoting these terrorist groups. People are so they're all the main people on social media. None of them are ever going to admit that these terrorist groups were started by the USA. So I certainly hope that as an educational effort, somebody will copy these terrorist groups and carry it around in your pocket. So next time somebody brings up ISIS or Al-Qaeda, you can set the record straight and bring it back to Obama. And then you will also be talked about as being a racist. So yeah, their net worth, I don't know. They have millions of dollars. Bush left office wealthy from family oil business ties. Clinton made money from speeches and books. And Obama's wealth leap is largely post-presidential. So yeah. So he had the mansion, the chef, and the lifestyle. But they're funded by book deals, Netflix, and speaking engagements, not just his presidential salary. So speaking of chefs and white coats, let me get to my point here. The chef uniform was a white double-breasted jacket and hat, was codified in France in the mid-1800s. White was chosen because it shows dirt and blah blah blah. Cotton can be bleached. Yeah, in hot kitchens, white reflects heat. So yeah, white chef jackets started in the 1800s, about the same time as the scientists and doctors got those white coats. And also, there's this whole theory with this black and white business, with this Illuminati, all those black and white checkered coats, right? They have black and white checkered floors and everything's black and white. Well, we also have some symbolism with all of this. Let me see. Early on, doctors wore dark coats, which would symbolize darkness, right? And popes wear the white habit or order, and then they have the other wear the dark ones, right? The ordinary priests wear black. So white shows up in the uniforms of chefs, doctors, and the Pope. So I think the reason that chefs are important in this whole picture and why they wear white is this. Well, when they have all these rituals and stuff, who's there taking care of slicing up those dead bodies and stuff? That would be chefs, right? And in the U.S., we've had 2 presidents have had chefs die under mysterious circumstances. So this is just kind of more for just kind of fun's sake than anything, right? I'm just being a little bit petty here, okay? Because I think that if you're a White House chef, well, you probably are involved in a lot of stuff, right? When they have these rituals and stuff, I mean, the chef probably knows a lot of stuff, because the black and white business comes from those Masonic lodges. They're often used as a checkerboard, black and white. They use those floor patterns in ritual rooms. So yeah, so many conspiracy writers link the historical with the checkerboard sign. In the 20th century, especially after the 1960s, they started to tie in the word Illuminati to a supposed hidden elite, and that's where they came back with the black and white business. And that's why judges wear black robes, right? And so Catholic priests, they wear black cassocks, and the Pope wears white. There is something to all this black and white, because the term the Black Pope is a nickname for the superior general of the Jesuit order, the Society of Jesus. And the Jesuits' normal priestly cassock was black, in contrast to the white. So I think if anybody were to ever really take a deep dive into all this stuff, I think we would find, and I'm not going to be that person, I'm just laying out the case here, I think we would find that there is something to what color these people are all wearing, right? So if this black pope is one of the Jesuits, well, that shows a evil side, right? Because I think this is all organized under this evil between good and evil. So anyways, I'm going to put this on hold for a second because I got to wrap up this file in a minute here. Okay, now that I have spun completely off the road with the Obama deal, let's get back into focus here. Well, it all started because of those closing those black ops sites. So, well, now's a good time to talk about terrorists. Okay, so let's talk about these buildings. Being a big fan of World War II things, came to my attention that I started thinking about, well, you know, there were a lot of buildings left behind. So I took a look. After World War II, and especially after Israel's founding in 1948, several 100,000 Romani Jews immigrated to Israel, many in the 50s to 70s under state-negotiated exit agreements. They left behind synagogues, schools, homes, businesses, and cultural institutions. In many towns, the Jewish population shrank to a tiny fraction of what it had been, and buildings were abandoned or repurposed. Then, of course, we had the communist era, 1947 to 1989. The communist regime confiscated private property and nationalized industry. It launched massive industrialization and urbanization programs. They built huge factories and housing blocks of concrete in every city. They bulldozed many old quarters, especially under Nikolai in the 70s to the 80s. In the countryside, collectivism emptied many villages of young people. Historic religious buildings, including synagogues and churches, were often neglected or demolished. Post-1989 transition. The fall of communism brought deindustrialization, high unemployment, and emigration to Western Europe. Many communist-era factories and housing where estates were left to decay. Whole neighborhoods show the mix of 19th century townhouses, abandoned synagogues, communist concrete high-rises, and post-1990s informal construction. So yeah, I would say there are a lot of buildings abandoned that could easily have been converted into these child pornography centers, right? They had the pre-war Jewish and Romanian towns. They had the Holocaust mass immigration left a lot of buildings behind. They had the gigantic communist-era factories and housing. They had post-communist decay and new construction. So yeah, in many places that went through war, dictatorship, and forced industrialization, large monumental buildings remain, even when the people who built or lived in them are gone. And it says Romania is one of those countries. So it says there are large structures that still dominate Romania's landscape. So here again, certainly there's plenty of buildings to do this pornography business, right? This child sexual abuse material business. Doesn't seem like a stretch to me. Refurbish some of those buildings just like they refurbish some of those Black-Ops sites, right? So, yeah, they have the palace. They have all these buildings. I'm not going to go through every one of them right now. I have every single one of them identified, though. So in the 50s to the 80s, the regime built huge industrial complexes in every region. They put in steelworks, steel plants, car factories, tractor plants, aircraft and car plants. Many closed or shrank after 1990. Some still stand. And they use concrete. So yeah, concrete certainly isn't like the kind of wood they use here, right? So from the late 1950s onward, Romanian cities were transformed by rows of prefabricated concrete apartment blocks built to house workers for new industries. Still home to millions, but often in poor repair and seen of a legacy of a drab authoritarian era. But yeah, I think that's the point here, is there's certainly not a lack of supply, right? And Romania, interestingly enough, stands out unique as having a lot of buildings, right? So yeah, you got a place where for some reason or another, right, mysteriously all these buildings survived, right? Handy, right? Maybe it was an accident, maybe it was on purpose, I don't really know. But anyhow, so I have a list of all of them down below because they say that tens of thousands of industrial structures, factories, warehouses, silos built in the 50s to 80s are no longer in use. Yeah. Anyway, so here's what I got on a roll about, and on my show notes over my website or down below, I shared with you the questions that I was asking, because when you start asking questions about if you want to take this research further and to look at these buildings in Romania, everybody will shut you down if you word yourself wrong, right? So after I was having this, ChatGPT is very good about extracting information for a timeline, and I'll get more to this later, but it is a horrendous mess as far as, it is not a tool, it's a pump and dump. So let me just leave that there, okay? So this is how I positioned my next question. I said, how about if I wanted to build a place that would house a lot of children in their own rooms for privacy? There could be adults living there in other parts to help the children. How many buildings would be available to consider? And let's look around where the U.S. and NATO bases are, so we have a safety plan for the children or a short distance from them. And then they said back to me, well, that's a thoughtful idea. You could absolutely scout Romania for large, underused buildings to convert into private rooms for kids with an on-site adult apartments and still be within quick reach of U.S. NATO bases for an added sense of security. So they gave me a list of places to look for next to NATO bases. And I'm not going to sit here and read them all. I've got them all located down below, because this is the kind of logic you want to follow. You want to say, you help me out here. How would I be able to help this situation? What would I do? And then I came up with the idea. I thought, well, I want to find places closest to NATO, NATO and military bases, right? So yeah, that unleashed a whole bunch of information. There's a ton of places near these places, like just one Air Force base, many disused industrial shells. Media documented examples include derelict sites and long neglected landmarks around Constantia. Yeah, so anyway, so I got the whole list down there. So then I wanted to know, well, how many buildings could really be in play? And they said Romania doesn't maintain a single national registry of idle sites, but multiple independent reports and local documents point to many dozens, likely hundreds, of large, disused industrial buildings nationwide, with high concentration around these bases, plus scattered in these other areas. So, and then they gave me a list of NATO bases next to these buildings, right? So, and I got this information because I proposed it, like, hey, if I was looking to build a place in Romania, and I didn't just lob that out as my first question. So I just said, hey, I'm looking for a place, what would you recommend? And, oh, that's wonderful. So anyway, so then I went looking for a distance to hospital and bases and found a lot of them just in looking from 20 to 60 kilometers outside restricted zones. So they said, oh, look for clear span, and they gave me a whole list of things to look for, and look for decommission, look for seismic and fire rules. It says Romania is seismically active. You'll need a structural retrofit plan and sprinklers, compartments, and stairs and staff. So it laid out the whole plan for me. And actually, what they're encouraging now in Romania is if you want to set up a place for children, they're encouraging these smaller type structures, which fits perfectly into these old buildings, right? So basically, you could have a structure for 10 to 20 family-style units. You could get, 150 children in there, and it would actually be quite a not that complicated of a thing to do. So yeah, I have all the information if you want to take a look at it. They say Romania follows EU-style institutionalized standards. The aim is not to create very large orphanages, but you give children a home-like environment. Perfect for this setup, right? The modern standards now, usually 6 to 12 children in one residential unit. Each child has their own bedroom, or in some homes shares a room with just one other child. The bedrooms are often with a window, heating, and access to a bathroom. And why small groups? Well, research shows children do better in small family-like settings. No, I would have to say because they phased out oversized dormitories in Romania in the year 2000 after all those horrible orphanages were exposed. So each home typically has 1 to 2 living caretakers. Yeah, they have, and so this little home that I was building in my head, it had room to have classrooms and all that kind of stuff. And they gave me some examples if you want to go tour around. There's an ex-boarding school in Transylvania. It renovated into 4 group home units, each housing 10 children. So yeah, they gave me a lot of helpful information, which gives you a really good idea, right? And they gave you some planning. Well, if you want to plan for 100 children, here's how much space you need. So yeah, I think that the idea that I have that these kids, to produce these child sexual abuse materials, I believe, and I'm not trying to be glib about this, but I don't think this would take a master planner to just replicate this, right? This does not seem possible because as of today, or as of 2024, large warehouse-type orphanages are essentially gone. Foster families care for about 2/3 of all children in the protection system. The rest live in small group homes, generally 6 to 12 children per unit, each with their own bedroom or shared with one other child. So only a few thousand children with complex disabilities still live in large residential medical centers, which are being upgraded or replaced. So Romania went from about 105,000 children in large orphanages in 1990 to fewer than 15,000 in any form of residential care today, most of them in much smaller home-like settings. So yeah, and then you've got all those NGOs working in Romania, and we have a cluster of NGOs, and I've got all of their names down below. I think it would be a very bad idea. Let's say that you want to take this one step further and say, yeah, I'll book a trip to Romania, and I'll go over there, I'll see for myself, and I'll fly in, and I'll contact some of these groups, and I'll say, hey, I got all this money to build an orphanage, can you help me? And we want one of these children home settings. Well, I would guarantee you probably never make your return flight home, right? Somehow you'd end up dead or something, right? Because I think it's probably a very, very tight group. Because they have groups like the Hope and Homes for Children, HHC in Romania, pioneer in closing old orphanages and creating family-type homes. They have another group, Save the Children in Romania, and these other foundations, World Vision Romania. They have the SOS Children's Villages, operate small village-style family homes. See, I don't think that my idea is like totally insane. But of course, I'm the one saying that it's not totally insane, and I could also be insane, right? So, two things can be real at the same time. So, one conclusion is most of Romania's large NGO-run homes are near or inside medium or large cities because that's where they have access to hospitals, pediatric care, schools, therapists, blah, blah, blah. Easier recruitment of trained staff, better transport links, yes. So they say that some of these cities also happen to be near NATO or U.S. infrastructure. Gee, isn't that just a shocking fact, right? So yeah, I think it's because I think of course you'd want your thing near the NATO center because you're flying those poor children out of there, right? Those kids are not coming unaccompanied. There are not that many people in Romania that are giving up their own children. These children are problematic and being stolen, but I'm not going to make any wild allegations. I will come back. I have been working on children stolen around the world for a very long time now, and I have some pretty conclusive evidence to share with you when I get a chance. So, yeah, because these children are targeted from poor families, they're in rural areas, runaways, and those leaving institutional care. So when kids leave institutional care, in some cases they leave as young as 16. Well, in Romania they leave at 18. Very few of them end up doing okay. Most of them end up becoming traffic victims. There was a group, and this is how it all worked. The EU membership in 2007 made legal travel for Romanians easier, and traffickers exploited that freedom. Okay, so 1994, computers are available at the home but not widely, and then in 2007, travel by the EU becomes legal, so people from Romania can easily cross the border. And I have the laws and stuff down below that allow this to happen. So, most identified victims were moved by car, van, minibus, or regular coach services across the borders into Hungary, and then onward to Austria, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, and Spain. Border guards do basic document checks at these crossings, but traffickers often present apparently valid ID and travel papers. Well, the whole system is paid off. These people know where they're moving things, and this is how it got going, because the EU came up with these free movement rules. Isn't that just the handiest thing on earth? So now, because of these free movement rules, you've got Romania is the hottest country in the world exporting these children. Gee, what a surprise, right? Just shocking information, I know. Well, I believe that they're being flown out of there by plane, that very few of them are coming across those borders by cars. Probably a decent amount, but anyway, so after 2007, Romanians could legally live and work anywhere in the EU. For criminals, this means they don't have to smuggle people across a guarded frontier. A trafficker can move a child by bus, train, or plane with valid ID. There is no routine visa or immigration check to trigger an alarm. So they say that Europol says trafficking to the EU is mostly an internal crime, not cross-border smuggling in the old sense. No, I think it's going across the border via airplanes, right? And I have all of the supposed reports and stuff down below. So, children without strong family support, especially those leaving institutions or foster care. I talked about this when I did the Netherlands show. It's been the last year, but there was a foster home or something for Vietnamese children in the Netherlands, and they typically lost over 90% of the children that were supposed to be in their custody. So if you think that it's just some wild conspiracy that children are being routed between foster care directly into the homes, well, it isn't a conspiracy. It is in fact true. So let me close off this file. I have some more information down below as far as this white chef business. There were 2 chefs that mysteriously went away that were chefs for the White House. I believe they were either ritually killed or they knew something, right? The first one was Tafari Campbell, aged 45, worked as a personal chef to Barack and Michelle. He drowned accidentally while paddleboarding in Martha's Vineyard. The accident happened in 2023. He fell off his paddleboard, and yeah, I did a whole show about it. So his body was recovered the next morning about 100 feet from the shore in water about 8 feet deep. Medical examiners ruled the cause of death as accidental drowning. And so anyway, they said that Campbell was writing a tell-all book about the Obamas, but no evidence of that. So anyhow, but there was another White House chef, Walter Sheep. He was a chef under Clinton. Clinton and Bush, that was a chef under those two. He set out alone for a hike in the Yerba Canyon Trail in New Mexico. He didn't return, reported missing the next day. After a search, his body was discovered off the trail from the. Autopsy said accidental drowning. Of course, he drowned too. It's very shallow water. Like Campbell's case with Obama's chef, Shive's death involved going out alone, ending off the trail, and being found after a delayed search. In both cases, the location was remote, hanging off paths with nature features like rocks and water, vegetation, and complicated rescue or discovery. In both cases, authorities have said there was no foul play. Well, I think it was because they wore that white coat, and I think that we need to keep our eyes on these white coat people. So that's why I think white coats and chefs have something to do with it, and that also brings me to my point. White coats and butchers butcher up that meat, right? So anyways, I've said enough for today. Kind of wrangled on a wild journey there through Obama, but I couldn't resist once I got to those Black-Ops sites to figure out who closed them down and why. Well, now we know why, right? And now you have your own handy-dandy list of terrorists. So if you want to get on the terrorist thing and go start looking around, if you have your terrorist list next to you, and once you read of a new crime in another country, all you have to do is take your eyes and look over that list and think, that looks like the U.S. has started that war. That's just one of their terrorists. So the terrorist group should hopefully be a guide for you to moving forward. So I posted at the bottom a very interesting case that I haven't had a chance to probably ever talk about, and it's called the Boys on the Track case. I think I might have talked about it briefly. A very sad case. I would encourage you to read it. I'm not going to be going into it right now. It's a case of a couple of boys who were out and they saw something illegal happening, and their mother, this is really a case to inspire you, their mother kept that case alive. Those boys would have just been dead and buried, and they were not just out there. They claimed they were there smoking weed and they fell asleep on the train tracks and got run over. Well, that really wasn't even close to being true. But I hope you'll read and understand the Boys on the Track story more yourself, because it's actually inspirational. That woman fought until the day that she died to get justice for her kids. So remember, we have to keep fighting. Complicity is really not the tool we want to use, because complicity means that we have accepted and that we are agreeing with what is going on. I myself will continue to expose what is going on. So be